Hello everyone and welcome to Quality Old Games. Today we are making a tier list from England's unit roster in Medieval 2 Total War the vanilla game. And the unit roster is based on campaign setting, so in addition to units' fighting capabilities, also the requirements, costs and upkeeps are taken into consideration. Furthermore, in the background of making this tier list is my How Good Is series. You can find link to the series in the video description. So the unit's performance in battles in that testing affects the scoring quite a bit. But without further ado, let's begin with cavalry units. First we have bodyguard, and since we only have early bodyguard in the campaign, late bodyguard is omitted from this tier list, and well, the bodyguard is quite solid and thus deserves clearly a place in S tier. Perhaps the only unit type that could have dropped the bodyguard from S tier is missile cavalry, but as England doesn't have it, so the bodyguard goes to S tier. Then we have demi-lancers, kind of a late game cavalry unit. And I think the unit suffers pretty much from the same issues as most other late game heavy cavalry units. They practically don't bring anything new to the table. So it's basically a bit fancier feudal knight with quite a bit higher requirements. And thus, I think well, the unit is rather good in battle, I'll give it that, but as the requirements are rather high, it clearly lowers the value, at least in my eyes, so I will give it only a low A tier because of those high requirements. And the unit price and upkeep are not that cheap either, so yeah, low A from me. Then we have English knights, and well, if demi-lancers suffered from the high requirements and bringing a bit too little, a bit too late, I think English knights suffer from the same, though a bit more. So in that case, I think they deserve only a place in B tier. This might be a bit controversial, but I think, well, when we progress with the knights, I will explain my view in a bit more detail. Then we have feudal knights. I mean, solid enough cavalry and available relatively early in the campaign. So basically, feudal knights, perhaps alongside with mailed knights, are the main reasons why these guys are getting the lower score. As you can do what must be done with feudal knights, why to wait or to go to any of these guys? So once you get the feudal knights, you practically have as good as cavalry as you are going to get in the campaign. So it kind of makes these late game heavy cavalry units somewhat obsolete in my eyes. But if you disagree, feel free to do so in the comment section. Perhaps another controversial unit or placing. Hobilar's light cavalry units, easily available, and I will actually give them S tier. And the reason is that with proper micro, you can actually do quite well in battles with these guys. And since they are readily available, you can replace or retrain them rather easily. And since they are light cavalry, they are a bit faster than heavy cavalry. So in addition to fighting relatively well, they excel at catching fleeing enemies and doing things that require speed. So for those reasons, a clear S tier from me. Then we have Knights Hospitaller and Knights Templar. I mean, solid enough cavalry units. Their requirements are a bit special, but I think if you participate in crusades, these guys are still more easily available than the late game heavy cavalry. So that's the reasoning behind giving them A tier. Then we have mailed knights. I mean, if you cannot get feudal knights, these guys will get the job done as well. Perhaps not as cleanly as feudal knights or the late game cavalry, but they are rather early available, so in my opinion clearly A tier heavy cavalry unit. And then we have merchant cavalry militia. Okay, militia cavalry is always nice, or rather militia units free of upkeep. that's great, but the unit's fighting capabilities leave quite a bit to be hoped for. So perhaps you can run down fleeing enemies with these guys, but I don't think I would rely on them too much to do anything else. So C tier, and mainly only because of the free upkeep in cities, which you can get. So let's move to infantry. First we have armored swordsmen, and actually they are one of the finest heavy infantry unit in the game, in my opinion. I mean, sword and shield in the vanilla medieval 2, that's kind of the best combination of weapons, especially compared to two-handed weapons. So I think they are actually surprisingly good, and they are doing rather well in the tests, despite being a rather late game unit. But I think I will give them high A tier. A really impressive unit, in my opinion. Considering some other heavy infantry units would go to B or C tier. Perhaps we will see some of them going there as well. Then we have Bill Militia, Billmen, kind of, well, let's begin with Bill Militia. Yeah, free upkeep, nice, but I mean the performance in battle is just bad, with one word, or perhaps even abysmal. So I would rather get some spear militia instead, because these guys cannot form even the shield drum. Of course, the attack value is great, so if you can flank or hit the rear of already engaged enemy unit, that's rather nice. But if the enemy brings some missile weapons, these guys are in trouble. If the enemy turns to face them, these guys are in trouble. So, and they are suffering from that two-handed weapons animations, which are rather slow in the vanilla version. So I guess in ideal situation they can hit enemy heavy cavalry that's already engaged. But since they are infantry, they might have difficulties reaching it. So despite militia having free upkeep, I will give them D. And well, the Billmen actually do somewhat better in battle than Bill Militia, but still, in my opinion, rather bad unit, and they will go to D tier as well. Pretty much the same thing applies to Billmen as to Bill Militia, though Bill Militia performs even worse in battle than Billmen. They have a bit weaker stats. Then we have dismounted English Knights, so they are suffering from the two-handed animations, and because of that I will give them only B tier. Because, well, they just don't do well enough in battles. So, yeah. In B tier. Kind of a shame. We have English Knights and dismounted English Knights, kind of unique units for faction, being lower than kind of the generalist all-arounder units. Well, actually these four. But yeah, I mean, they are kind of below these units that are clearly in A. Then we have dismounted feudal knights. I mean, that's the kind of the heavy infantry you will need if you are to succeed in the campaign. I mean, they will get the job done, and they will get it done, well, perhaps not in the cleanest way possible, but they will get the job done. Not quite as good as armored swordsmen, but clearly better than dismounted English knights. So I think a weak A tier is rather appropriate for them. Then we have heavy bill militia, and actually these guys can do somewhat better in battle. You can already see it from the armor. So quite a bit more protection, and the damage is great, but still, in my opinion, the unit suffers to some degree from the same issues as the lighter variants, Bill Militia and Billmen. So, not completely useless, but I think I would take these dismounted feudal knights, for example, quite a bit over heavy Bill Militia or heavy Billmen. And actually, the stats between these two units are not that different, so basically the free upkeep aspect of heavy bill militia puts it above the heavy billmen in my books. So, and of course this is the heaviest militia unit you can recruit from cities, so yeah, perhaps you might end up using them, but I mean, if you are trying to get a kind of a late game army from a city and you specifically build heavy billmen and heavy bill militia, I think you will be disappointed in the performance of the army. So, in my opinion, not two great units. Then let's continue. We have Levy Spearmen. Yeah, I think they are rather trash unit. And, well, they are practically a bit worse than Spear Militia. And they don't come with free upkeep. So, yeah, you can do something against cavalry with these guys, but, I mean, go for instance for peasant archers instead. They are quite a bit better than Levy Spearmen. Yeah, a bad unit in my books. Then we have another bad unit in my books, peasants. Clearly, D tier, they are pretty much useless. Of course, in some situations, you need to boost public order in cities, then these guys can do something. They can hold the walls, so the towers can do the killing of the enemies in sieges, but overall, I mean, only train these if you cannot get anything else. There might be such situations in campaigns, but yeah, try to get something better quite soon if you are forced to train these. Then we have Spear Militia. In my opinion, well, early game unit. It's relatively... well, it's not good in battle. It can hold the line for a while and it can do surprisingly well against cavalry in shield dome formation. So that's nice. And of course the free upkeep. So I think I will give them low C. Yeah. Low C. And then we have Town Militia. The same applies to them as to Spear Militia, except that they cannot even do that well against cavalry. So to D tier, I think it is for them. Of course, they are the kind of the easiest to access unit pretty much in cities. So probably you will end up using them, and the unit size is a bit larger than with Spear Militia, but I think in battle, spears will actually be more useful. So that's the reasoning behind putting these guys to D tier and these guys to C tier. Then let's move to missile units. First we have Archer Militia. I mean, decent enough missile unit. Actually, there are not a missile unit in this game, in my opinion, that's not at least decent. So someone might argue that cavalry is king, and, well, that's rather correct. But I think the missile units come clearly at least second, and in some cases I think they can actually be a bit better than cavalry units. And thus Archer Militia is decent enough in battle, and I mean free upkeep, so that's rather nice. And yeah, B tier rather well deserved. And actually, I have not tested in the How Good Is series, so basically it has practically the same stats as Peasant Archers, except that you can access Peasant Archers a bit earlier, but these guys do receive the free upkeep. So I think they will both go to this same tier, and perhaps I should put these guys here as well. And because I value the free upkeep a bit higher than, or rather the possibility for free upkeep a bit higher than the early access for the units, I will keep the order as it is. So I will value Archer Militia a bit higher than Peasant Archers. Then we have Arquebusiers, rather nice unit for armor piercing and so on and so forth. But they come rather late in the game and it's a bit tricky to get the unit to work properly in the campaign. And as England already has rather nice missile units, I think, well, at least I don't use this unit too much in my campaign. So I will give it B. If you are a fan of gunpowder units, then of course that's the only gunpowder missile unit available for England. So clearly it deserves a place in B tier, perhaps even higher if you like them. But I think I find myself using these other missile units, or at least some of these, quite a bit more than Arquebusiers. And then we have Longbowmen. In my opinion, solid B tier. Perhaps I'm myself a bit surprised here. I would kind of intuitively give them A tier. But the reasoning behind B tier in this case is that they actually, in my books, underperformed against enemy cavalry in testing. So they can deploy the wooden stakes, but at least in the cases where I tested these, the enemy cavalry actually went around the stakes and was able to hit these guys quite hard. And since their stats are not that great, that will even a small number of the enemies getting through the stakes or circling around them will hit these guys quite hard. So that's the reasoning behind giving them only high B instead of low A. But if the stakes would have held, I think I would give them A tier. They would earn some extra points in the How Good is testing. I actually tried the battle several times, so it wasn't kind of a random thing happening just once, but it happened consistently. Interestingly, it didn't happen with retinue longbowmen. So there the stakes performed rather nicely and actually held the enemy cavalry, and because of that and the rather high stats the unit has, I think it clearly deserves a place in S tier. A clearly superb missile unit in the game. Then we have another superb missile unit in battles, Sherwood Archers. However, you might be struggling a bit in getting these units, and of course the unit size is rather small, and they cannot deploy the sharpened stakes, so that's a minus as well. So, based on the comments in a recent video where I tested these, they are great for sniping enemy missile units, which actually I saw myself when testing them, but also their armor-piercing missiles could be used to sniping generals, and by the way, armor-piercing missiles, at least these higher tier long-range missile units do have armor-piercing as well, so kind of England's variant of crossbowmen. But yeah, the smaller unit size makes this unit perform a bit worse against other enemies, and the requirements can be tricky. The Woodsman Guild, so you need to have Citadel to get, rather Fortress to get tier 1 Woodsman Guild, and then you need to have Citadel to get tier 2, from which you can get the first of these guys. So the Woodsman's Guild is rather nice building to have, boosting archers all over the campaign map, but in my opinion rather tricky to get. So that's perhaps the main reasoning behind rather weak B for this unit. And then we have Yeoman Archers, which actually are a bit cheaper than Retinue Longbowmen and performing actually almost as well as them. But in my opinion, the requirements being a bit lower for these guys give them the edge over the Retinue Longbowmen. And of course, the higher the building tier in requirements goes, there is quite a difference from getting this building that costs 4,800 to this building costing 9,600 and taking 5-6 turns to build. So yeah, that will hurt. But of course, when you get the building, then I guess this would be the unit of the choice for me. So there we have missile units, and finally we have siege weapons, which are rather kind of generic for almost all of the factions. So the rating here pretty much follows the same as with other factions. First we have ballista. I mean, not completely useless, but I don't like the units too much, so I think C tier is rather fine. Of course, with flaming armor, tightly packed enemies, you can do some damage with them, but I would rather more likely take some archer unit instead of ballistas. Then we have bombard, rather the first proper gunpowder artillery unit, and rather useful for knocking down enemy castle walls and towers. So yeah, I think it deserves a place in B tier because it's rather easy to get and it still packs quite a punch. And then my favorite siege weapon, catapult. I mean, the firing arc of this unit is kind of unique, so you can inflict huge damage to enemy formations if the ammo kind of fits or the projectile hits properly. So it has huge potential, especially in, for example, defensive siege battles, if you can bring them to bear at the gates when the enemy is trying to get through. And furthermore, they can do some damage to stone walls as well, so they are not completely useless in the kind of main purpose that siege weapons have. So because of that, I will give them low A tier. And my main qualm with siege weapons, all of them, is that they slow down the army. And yeah, that's the main reason, at least I don't take them too often, because in my experience, keeping the momentum, keeping up the tempo in the campaign will keep the enemies in back foot, and then you will be able to kind of smash through the front line and then wreak havoc behind the lines. And if you have siege weapons, wreaking that havoc will become quite a bit more difficult. But feel free to disagree once again in the comments if you feel so. Then we have Cavalry. I mean, it's the best artillery piece England can get. However, the requirements are quite a bit higher than for Bombard. And well, of course, the Cavalry is quite a bit better than Bombard, but still, I think because of the higher requirements, I will give it only solid B instead of good B tier. Then we have Mortar. Yeah, you can fire over the walls, you can hit enemy troops on top of the walls, but still, I have found myself kind of disliking the unit somewhat, so I will give it only C tier. If I want to smash the walls, I will just use Culverines or Bombards instead of these. But I will give them that they might have their uses, so strong C. Then we have Revolt, kind of a siege weapon for open fields, or perhaps in defensive siege battles as well. This can be rather devastating on a street. So a nice barrage, of course, the loading time is quite long as well, so it has to be protected after firing its salvo. I think I will give it B. Solid B it is for that unit. And then we have Trebuchet, the kind of the ultimate siege weapon for early game. Still, I don't like it quite as much as catapults, so I will give it a bit weaker B. So, here is my tier list of England's unit roster in Vanilla Medieval 2 Total War, and by Vanilla I mean the latest version in Steam, but not the Kingdoms expansion. So, what do you think? Do you agree or disagree? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. And thank you very much for watching. If you like the content, please leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. If you want to support the channel, consider becoming a channel member. And very special thanks to existing channel members, Napoleon Complex, Kosaku Shar, Mark Anthony. Your support is greatly treasured. Have a great rest of the day. Quality Old Games out.